Out here, under the bruised velvet of the desert sky, where the stars hang heavy like secrets and the wind moves like breath through the ghost gums, there are stories older than time itself, not carved in stone, but sung into the land. Stories of creation, of punishment, of beauty and dread. And at the center of many of these murmurs, slithering through the dreaming like a current beneath still water, is a being whose name is never just a name. It is an invocation, the Rainbow Serpent. Not merely a creature of color and curl, but the very breath of the earth, when it was still dreaming itself into shape. Her scales shimmered with every hue of the storm's end, her movement carved rivers into stone. She was the law before law had a name. She still is, if you know how to listen. For the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, she is more than myth. She is memory and presence, guardian of waterholes, mother of the land's contours. Her path is written across thousands of kilometers, from Arnhem Land to the Kimberley, from the red sands of the centre to the coastal mangroves, where salt clings to the air like old sorrow. She's not always kind, but she is always just. When the rains finally come after the long burn of the dry season and the desert blooms with reckless joy, that's her promise being kept. When a place goes dry and the people suffer, that's her anger uncoiled. And when the rainbow arches across the western sky, touching down in some unseen sacred spring, the elders nod quietly. They know she's watching, still moving, still alive. And yet, for all the reverence, there's another thread that snakes through this tale, a question hissed in the quiet moments of doubt. What if the Rainbow Serpent was not just spirit, but memory? Not only metaphor, but encounter? Could it be that beneath the swirling paint of her image there once lay flesh, cold-blooded, massive and real? It's a dangerous question, and not just because it tugs at sacred things. But sometimes, in the silence of the scrub, when the cicadas pause and the air grows too still, you can feel the old knowledge shifting, not disappearing, never that, but evolving, like the land itself. Because belief and truth don't always stand at odds. Sometimes they walk side by side, like twin tracks in red earth. One spiritual, one physical, both real. So tonight, around this crackling fire where light flickers against gnarled bark and distant howls echo like memory, we ask, who is the Rainbow Serpent? And more than that, what is she? A divine force, carved in dreamtime and sung across generations, or a remnant of a prehistoric terror glimpsed by early humans, its size and strangeness too vast to forget? We'll walk this winding path gently, like tracking something too old to name. Listen close. The bush is speaking. They say she carved the rivers with her belly, gouged out water holes with the weight of her coiled rest. The Rainbow Serpent, known by many names, Yolungur, Galeru, Ngaliod, depending on which land you stand upon and whose elders you ask. But always, she slithers through the same essence, water, life, law. Her body may take different forms, her stories different shapes, but the song remains constant, echoing from one dreaming to the next. Among the Yolngu people of Arnhem Land, she is a force of transformation. Among the Gija of the Kimberley, she is the shaper of terrain. In the Pitjantjatjara country, she may sleep beneath the dry surface of a sacred claypan, waiting to stir when the skies burst open. Always feminine in power, though sometimes androgynous, sometimes many, but never absent. And she does not simply appear. She emerges when the rains come, when the rivers rise, when the land itself exhales after holding its breath through the dry. Her appearance in the sky, coiled in color across the clouds, marks more than weather. It is her arrival, her judgment. The rock art tells this story in ochre and charcoal, some of it stretching back tens of thousands of years. Coiled shapes painted in deep cave walls, often in places only the initiated may enter. Patterns that shimmer with the memory of scales, of movement, always near water, always with reverence. Sometimes the serpent curls around other beings, goannas, fish, birds, her shape both predator and protector. She is depicted with eyes wide and all-seeing, her mouth open in warning or welcome. In these images, she is not metaphorical. She is detailed, deliberate, living. And the people who paint her do not do so lightly. These are not just drawings. They are links, contracts, sacred maps binding present to past, humans to country. To paint her is to remember her, to honor her, and to dishonor her, to damage the rock she sleeps in, to pollute the water she guards, is to invite her wrath. Floods that sweep away homesteads, droughts that crack the earth, even sickness. To the Western mind, it may sound like superstition. But in the outback, where the line between survival and ruin is thinner than a blade of spinifex, there are no coincidences, only consequences. Still, one must wonder, how did such a powerful, consistent image rise across so many regions, so many languages, with so much continuity? How did people who never saw each other draw the same being in stone, speak the same name with different tongues? Perhaps the serpent is part of the land itself, as much as the red dust or the eucalyptus. Or perhaps something else, something that once crawled, massive and terrible, across this sunburnt continent, leaving tracks that became stories. Science tells us that stories evolve like rivers. They begin in truth and meander through myth. But sometimes, when you follow the stream back to its source, you find not just an idea, but a footprint. And maybe, just maybe, those footprints were left by something more than metaphor. Long before asphalt carved its scars across the land and satellites traced invisible paths above the desert, there were giants here. Not the kind from fairy tales or whispered warnings, but flesh and blood colossi, creatures of muscle, scale and hunger that moved through the scrub with the weight of the dreaming still clinging to their backs. The ancient ones, the Megafauna. We know their names now only through science and stone: Megalania, Wonambi Megalania, Quincana, echoes of a time when the earth breathed slower, heavier, when man was not the apex but the newcomer, standing barefoot on ancient soil with a spear in hand and fear in his chest. And among those giants, none haunt the imagination more than the serpents. The Wonambi was no myth. Fossils whisper of a snake 6 meters long, thick as a man's torso, head like a battering ram, a constrictor, like the great pythons of today, but broader, slower, more silent. It didn't slither, it undulated, like a river in motion. It hunted near water, coiled in ambush, and when it struck with the inevitability of drought. Aboriginal people lived alongside it for generations, saw its shimmer in the reeds, heard its weight in the grass, and when it vanished, its form remained, pressed into the collective memory of the land. Perhaps that's the root, not dream, not invention, but encounter. To see such a creature, glistening with wet skin beneath the sun, arched over a pool of water like a rainbow made flesh, it would leave a mark not just on the mind, but on culture. It would demand explanation, reverence, fear, and over centuries, that reverence would become ritual. The story would shift with each telling, gain layers, colors, a divine purpose, until the snake was no longer just an animal, it was the law. And it's not just the Wonambi. The Megalania, too, deserves its place in the mythos. A goanna the length of a minibus, strong enough to drag down kangaroos, with jaws capable of crushing bone. Cold eyes, reptilian cunning. It was not a serpent, but close enough in terror. Could it have inspired stories that later coiled into the serpent's legend? Maybe. The bush doesn't differentiate as cleanly as textbooks do. To the people of the land, what matters is the presence, the feeling, the pattern of danger. And yet, it isn't only size that matters here. There's something about the behavior of snakes that lends them to myth, the way they vanish into the earth and return, unchanged, the way they shed their skin, reborn, the silence of their movement, the duality, life-giver when guarding water, death-bringer when threatened. In that liminal space between predator and protector, the rainbow serpent finds her power. But what binds her truly to the rainbow? There's something sacred in that arc of light, ephemeral, beautiful, untouchable. It arrives with the rain, signaling life. It fades with the sun, like a spirit returning home. In the Outback, where rain is not a nuisance but a miracle, the rainbow is more than a trick of light. It's a message, and when that message is curved, coiled, moving across the sky like a serpent in slow flight, the story writes itself. The bush teaches through signs. The rainbow above, the snake below, and between them the people, learning the rhythm of both. That's not coincidence, that's connection. There's a silence out here that speaks louder than thunder. It hums in the gum trees, it rides the dust, it settles into your bones when you're alone long enough. In that silence, you begin to hear the stories, old ones, sung into the rocks and etched into the memory of the soil. And in almost every corner of this sun-seared land, that silence holds the same name, the Rainbow Serpent. But names alone don't carry her weight. It's what lies beneath them, the law, the line between reverence and ruin. For the Arunte people near Alice Springs, the Rainbow Serpent is called Yeparenyi, a being of great power who shaped the McDonnell Ranges during the dreaming. Her path can be traced in the jagged folds of the earth, in the sacred waterholes nestled deep within stone. Each bend, each peak, each shadow has its place in the story. The land is not a backdrop, it's a sacred text, and the serpent is the ink. In Kakadu, she is known as Almuj. Her stories flow through wetlands and billabongs, where crocodiles now bask and birds cry out in praise. She watches over the freshwater places, the billowing clouds, the morning mist. The air itself feels different in those places, thicker, like something ancient is holding its breath, and always she is tied to water. In a continent as dry and defiant as Australia, water is everything. Where there is water, there is life. Where there is life, there are stories. And where there are stories, there is the Rainbow Serpent. But she is not gentle by nature. Her gift is balanced by her temper. Many tales warn of her fury. Floods that rise without warning, washing away those who disrespected sacred sites. Crops lost, children vanished, animals scattered. These are not just cautionary tales. They are records, oral histories encoded in myth, reminding each generation to tread lightly, to remember the sacred in every drop. Some might scoff, call it primitive, superstition. But that arrogance has consequences out here. Miners drill into hills never meant to be touched. Developers flatten ground where stories sleep, and then the rains come, or don't, and nothing grows. Coincidence? Maybe, but maybe not. Because the Rainbow Serpent isn't just a story of the past, she's a force of now. In many Aboriginal communities today, her law continues to guide decisions, where to build, where not to walk, when to gather water, how to treat the land. These are not metaphors. They are instructions carried from ancestor to grandchild, from elder to youth, in the unbroken line of the dreaming. The elders say, when you see a rainbow, greet her. When you hear the water bubbling in a dry season, thank her. When you take from the land, give something back. That's her law. That's the balance she holds. And beneath all that reverence, there lingers still the quiet possibility that the origin of her tale began not only in spirit, but in sight. That somewhere in the prehistoric hush of this continent, people once looked into the eyes of something vast and reptilian, something more than animal, less than God, and from that stare built a legend that would outlive time itself. They say the dreaming is not just a time, but a state, a way of seeing the land not as dead matter, but as living memory. And in that memory, coiled like veins beneath red earth, lies the Rainbow Serpent. Her presence is not limited to ancient carvings or dusty myths. It pulses through the very decisions of modern life in the Outback. She governs more than the sacred. She governs survival. And in a place where survival can hinge on the depth of a single waterhole, her influence is absolute. Among the Walpiri, whose country stretches across the central deserts, there is a story of a giant serpent who lives in the soakages, hidden reservoirs in the sand that only the initiated know. To find these places is to find life. To trespass without proper respect, without song or offering, is to invite disappearance. Not metaphorical, but real. People vanish in the Outback, even today. Sometimes it's heat stroke, sometimes it's dehydration. But to those who know the stories, it's the serpent reclaiming what's hers, and it isn't just remote communities or desert tribes who speak her name. Her image appears in contemporary Aboriginal art, across canvases that shimmer like sun-baked salt flats. She winds through the work of Emily Kame Kungware, through the concentric circles of Minnie Puerl, in the vibrant, sinuous strokes of Rover Thomas. These aren't just paintings, they are maps, songs, invocations. To paint her is to keep her alive, not just in memory, but in presence. Because to the people of the dreaming, belief isn't passive, it's active. To believe is to maintain the world. Yet for all the reverence, there remains that tantalizing, unsettling whisper. Could she also be a creature born of observation? It's easy to dismiss such speculation as romanticism, but then you find yourself deep in the scrub, in places where the land rises and falls in unnatural symmetry, where boulders lie stacked like vertebrae. You feel watched. And in that moment, the line between myth and zoology begins to blur. In the early 2000s, paleontologists working near Narracoorte in South Australia uncovered a series of fossilized bones unlike anything seen before. They belonged to Wonambi narracoortensis, the so-called Rainbow Serpent of the Pleistocene epoch. Non-venomous, but large enough to swallow a wallaby whole. The remains were found near ancient sinkholes and water systems, exactly where dreaming stories say the serpent sleeps. Coincidence? Perhaps. But then there's the way those stories persist across regions, across tongues. Each version slightly different, yet always circling the same image, a vast, coiled being of both creation and consequence, always near water, always sacred. And here's where it gets more curious. The Wonambi is not the only reptile in the fossil record with such traits. Northern Queensland too has yielded remains of liasis, ancestral pythons possibly larger than any today. Western Australia whispers of Megalania prisca, a monitor lizard so large it would dwarf a saltwater crocodile, its claws like machetes, its tongue forked like prophecy. And although not snakes, these beasts lived alongside early Aboriginal Australians. The overlap is more than plausible, it's undeniable. Imagine a child seeing one of these creatures at dusk, silhouetted against a waterhole. Imagine that story told to their child, and their child, and theirs. Over thousands of years, details shift, names evolve, but the fear, the awe that remains, and eventually it isn't just a snake, it's the serpent. And what of the rainbow? Rainbows are among the most profound phenomena one can witness in the desert. They arrive rarely when sun and storm meet in precise alignment. To see one stretch across the open sky is to feel as if the world has cracked open. They are color made tangible, beauty made fleeting. And their shape, a long arc, curved, soft yet precise, is that of a serpent in the sky, a bridge, a sign. In many cultures, the rainbow is a path for spirits. In the Outback, it is her spine. This symbolic fusion of ancient reptile and celestial arc is not coincidental. It's a synthesis. It is how oral cultures transmit complexity, by layering truths. The rainbow serpent is not just a deity, nor just an animal, nor just a metaphor. She is all three, woven together in a songline that stretches from the first human footstep on this continent to the breath you draw now. And even today, her power is felt. In the Northern Territory, entire regions are protected because of her influence. Developers are stopped, mining leases are revoked, not for profit, not for science, but because the elders said, "She sleeps there. And if she sleeps, you do not wake her." There's a bend in the Catherine River where the eucalyptus leans just so, and the stones along the bank seem older than the sky. Locals say the rainbow serpent once moved through there, dragging her immense body through the rock, carving the channels with the weight of her dreaming. They don't say this with the distance of legend. They say it as you might say the sun rises in the east. It is a truth of the land, baked in by centuries of observation, belief, and blood. What happens when land and story are one? When a curve in a dry creek bed is not just erosion, but the imprint of something divine? That's how the rainbow serpent survives, not in temples but in topography. The land itself is her scripture, and to live upon it without understanding is to walk blindly through a sacred text, trampling truths you don't even know are there. This is why the rainbow serpent endures, while so many other myths wither in books. She is not confined to story. She is story and place and law. In Western perception, myth is often seen as fabrication, but in Aboriginal culture, myth is explanation. It is knowledge passed through ceremony, through dance, through art. It's not less than science, it's another way of knowing, and that knowing has weight. In 2010, during a controversial mining proposal near the sacred site of Ngulawuru, protests erupted, not with chants or banners, but with silence and song. Elders stood by the waterhole and sang the path of the rainbow serpent, describing her journey in verses older than the English language. Each line marked a contour of the land, a change in the soil, a shift in the stone. It was a map, a warning, and in time it worked. The proposal was dropped. The land remained untouched. How does one reconcile this power with the idea of a prehistoric snake? Perhaps the point is not to reconcile at all. The serpent operates on more than one level: biological, spiritual, ecological. She is the ultimate hybrid, a memory of a creature once seen and now mythologized, a spirit of water and transformation, a teacher of lore and respect. Each layer deepens the next, and this isn't unique to Australia. Across the globe, serpent deities appear with uncanny consistency. In the Americas, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl. In Africa, the rainbow serpent Dan Ayido Huedo. In Hindu mythology, the Naga. Always, they straddle elements, earth and water, sky and rain. Always, they hold creation and destruction in balance. This suggests not cultural borrowing, but something deeper, an archetype born of shared human experience. The snake, the river, the rainbow, all tied by shape and symbolism. But in Australia, the serpent is not a relic. She's present. Her stories adapt with the times. In some regions, elders use her tale to explain climate change. When the land is hurt, the serpent suffers. When the balance is broken, she rises, not as a punishment but as a response. Drought, flood, fire, they are seen not only as environmental phenomena, but spiritual messages, warnings. She doesn't need temples. Her altar is the land itself. And while Western science may scoff at this, it's worth remembering that Indigenous Australians managed the land sustainably for over 60,000 years, using this very knowledge system. Fire stick farming, seasonal migration, selective harvesting, all guided by dreaming stories, including those of the rainbow serpent. To dismiss that is not just arrogant, it's foolish. We may never know for certain whether a giant serpent once roamed this land and inspired the first stories, The fossil record is incomplete. Memory is not a fossil. It does not petrify. It transforms. But the consistency, the depth, the cultural endurance of the rainbow serpent cannot be ignored. She is real, not because she fits neatly into a category, but because she refuses to. She is the serpent and the storm, the flood and the thirst, the rainbow and the silence after. She is the question that remains long after the story ends. The serpent doesn't just glide across the landscape, she coils into the psyche, and if you listen to the old ones, really listen, you begin to understand that her story isn't about the past, it's about continuity. She is the dreaming made perpetual, moving through time not as a memory but as a force, a shapeshifter of meaning, shedding her skin to remain alive in each generation's telling. You see it in how she's invoked when water holes dry unexpectedly, when a child is born with the mark of something unseen, when fire moves too quickly across country. Her name is spoken quietly then, not as a superstition, but as a diagnosis. The balance has been disturbed. The old laws, hers, have been ignored. And in her silence, she speaks loudest. This is where Western logic falters. It wants proof, bones, carbon dating, measurable data. But the rainbow serpent doesn't live in the fossil bed. She lives in the gap between what you see and what you feel. And that's where her power is. But still, the bones whisper. The fossil record tells us that Aboriginal Australians arrived on this continent more than 65,000 years ago, long before the Megafauna vanished. They shared the land with the giants. They hunted alongside, fled from, and adapted to creatures like the Megalania, Procoptodon, and Wonambi. These weren't abstract beings. They were neighbors, threats, presences. And unlike modern humans, those early Aboriginal communities didn't write on paper or stone in the Western sense. They sang, they danced, they painted in ochre on cave walls and bark. Their records moved with the breath, and while these methods may seem fragile to a world obsessed with permanence, they endured. That's no small feat. That's civilization. Consider this. Some of the art in the Northern Territory, particularly in places like Ubir and Norlangi, depicts creatures that have not roamed these lands for thousands of years. They show animals with thick torsos and long necks, features consistent with extinct marsupials and serpents. These are not fantasy. They are recollections. And in those depictions, the rainbow serpent's form becomes even more fascinating. Sometimes she is shown as a pure snake, immense and coiled. Other times she takes on more hybrid forms, part fish, part crocodile, shimmering with unnatural hues, always associated with water, with motion, with thresholds. She occupies the liminal. She is not this or that. She is both, always both. Even the way she is spoken of evokes duality. She brings life and takes it. She gives rain and floods. She connects the heavens and the underworld. In Western thought, opposites cancel each other out. But in Dreamtime logic, opposites define one another. And the serpent existing at the axis of this system is both warning and comfort. There's an old story from the Kimberley about a man who defied the law of the serpent. He built his camp too close to a sacred pool, ignoring the warnings of the elders. That night, thunder shook the earth. The pool rose and swallowed his fire. His voice was never heard again. Some say the serpent took him. Others say he became part of the land, punished but not erased. That's the way of her justice, transformative, not annihilative. And in her symbolism lies the key to her endurance. Because the rainbow serpent isn't only about creation myths or ancient fears. She represents the law of interdependence, water and life, action and consequence, presence and respect. Her image reminds people that the land watches, that the land remembers. This might seem poetic, but it has practical weight. In communities across Arnhem Land, children are still taught where not to swim, where not to camp, based on her paths. These taboos, enforced through sacred stories, protect both people and ecosystems. In many cases, what Western ecologists later identify as sensitive wetlands or endangered habitats, Aboriginal law has long marked as serpent country. It's not superstition, it's survival. In this way, her myth becomes method, her story, science, her law, ecology. And in the stillness after rain, when the frogs begin to call and the scent of eucalyptus hangs heavy in the air, you begin to feel her presence, not as a tale, but as a system, breathing, watching, waiting. There's a stretch of desert between the Simpson and the Great Victoria where the dunes move with a kind of ancient patience. They shift slowly, year by year, reshaping the horizon like something breathing beneath the surface. It's here, in the silence broken only by wind and willies, that the Rainbow Serpent's imprint becomes ghost-like, not in what's there, but in what's been remembered. The elders of the Anangu people say she passed through this land long before the desert became what it is now. Back then, the place teemed with lakes and green corridors. It was her passage, her resting place. And when the water receded, when the climate shifted, she burrowed deep. Not gone, never gone, but sleeping. The sand is her skin now, the wind her breath. It's this belief that has protected these lands for thousands of years, not just from desecration but from misuse, because to believe in the Rainbow Serpent is to acknowledge limits, to accept that not everything is meant to be touched, not every hole meant to be dug. Sacredness here is practical. And that's something the modern world keeps forgetting. Mining companies, enticed by mineral wealth hidden beneath ancient soils, often come face to face with these old laws. In 2020, the destruction of Juukan Gorge in Western Australia, a sacred site with evidence of continuous human occupation for over 46,000 years, sparked national and international outrage. The company claimed ignorance. The people, in contrast, claimed desecration, because to them, those caves were not just historical. They were living. They held the memory of the serpent. And in destroying them, something was uncoiled, not just rage, but imbalance. Rain patterns shifted, dust storms followed, crops failed. It was the land responding, as it always has, in its own language. This isn't coincidence to those who listen to the bush. It's causality, spiritual, ecological, interwoven, and science, in its way, is beginning to catch up. Studies in ecological anthropology have shown how sacred sites, like those associated with the Rainbow Serpent, often align with biodiverse hotspots. Places of ceremony double as conservation zones. Restrictions dictated by dreaming stories serve the same function as modern environmental policy, but where science draws borders on maps, the serpent draws them in songlines, unseen yet utterly binding. These songlines, called chukurpa in the Pitjantjatjara language, are more than myths. They are geographic memory systems, pathways across the land that encode information about survival, navigation, seasons, and ceremony. When someone follows a songline, they aren't just traveling, they're reading the land. And the Rainbow Serpent's path is one of the longest and most sacred. In these lines, she tells not only where the water is, but when it will come. She marks the time to hunt, the place to rest, the moment to give thanks. Her rhythm is the rhythm of sustainability. Imagine a world where laws are learned not through books or courts, but through ceremony and sky, where the voice of your grandmother is the same voice that once sang the river into being. That's what the serpent holds, the unbroken thread, not just of life, but of memory. And so when we ask what she is, we must be prepared for an answer that's too large to define. She is not just a mythic being, nor a fossilized memory, nor an environmental metaphor. She is all of it, simultaneously. She is continuity itself. Even in urban Australia, far from the billabongs and red earth, you can find her. painted on murals, woven into indigenous curricula, evoked in political debate. She's become a symbol for cultural resilience, for Aboriginal sovereignty, for the connection to country that modern life tries so hard to sever. And as the climate crisis intensifies, her relevance only grows. She reminds us of the cost of imbalance, of the arrogance of exploitation, of the fragility of systems too old to fully understand. The elders say she is stirring again, that the fires, the floods, the relentless droughts, these are her signs. She's not punishing, she's warning. In the stillness after a storm, when the sky begins to clear and the scent of burnt eucalyptus lingers in the air, you might catch it, that shimmer on the horizon, the soft arc of color bending through the clouds. A rainbow, yes, but to those who walk with old knowledge, it's something more. It's the serpent stretching her back, reminding the world she still watches, still moves. To the casual observer, it's a beautiful coincidence of light and water. But to the initiated, it's a signal, a sacred convergence. Because for thousands of years, rainbows have meant something very specific in the Outback. They mean water is near, and where water flows, the serpent coils. This is not just belief. It's a map coded in atmosphere. Even the physics of a rainbow echo the myth. You cannot touch it, you cannot approach it. The closer you move, the further it recedes. Like the serpent, it is seen but never grasped, felt but never possessed. Its beauty is in its distance. Its truth lies in the longing it evokes. And so the rainbow serpent, in her celestial form, becomes a bridge, not just between sky and soil, but between the visible and the unseen. She teaches that power lies not in control, but in connection, that the land is not something to be dominated, but listened to. It's a truth the oldest cultures on Earth have known all along. Aboriginal cosmology is not linear. Time does not move forward in a straight line. Instead, time coils like a snake, returning to itself, looping through ceremony, land, and memory. The dreaming is not in the past. It is always. The serpent does not belong to history. She belongs to the now. And perhaps that's what makes her so enduring. While gods and myths in other cultures have faded into metaphor, she adapts. In some communities, she is still invoked before land clearing. Her story is shared in schools, through language programs aiming to preserve dialects that are vanishing at alarming rates. Children learn her names before they learn the Western alphabet. Not as a curiosity, but as foundation. There is immense power in that. In her, culture is preserved not through preservation alone, but through use, living, breathing, changing use. She is the serpent that moves even while at rest, and yet she is also a mirror. In the serpent, we see our own dualities, our capacity to create and to destroy, our connection to the elements, our fear of what lies beneath. She's been cast as goddess, as demon, as memory, but always, always, she reflects. When floods ravaged Queensland in 2011, many Aboriginal voices interpreted it through the lens of the serpent's warning. Too much taken, too little given back, the balance broken. In mainstream Australia, it was a natural disaster. In serpent country, it was prophecy fulfilled. And so the rainbow serpent continues, not just in the lines of song and stone, but in the very way people relate to land and life. To walk where she's walked is to tread softly. To see her arc in the sky is to remember that this world is not ours to own. We belong to it. Even non-Indigenous Australians have begun, slowly, to understand. Environmental movements increasingly draw upon Indigenous knowledge, recognizing that science alone cannot restore what's been lost. The serpent is there too, in policy discussions, in art installations, in the growing realization that sustainability is not just numbers and models, but stories and songs. And in her silence, she speaks. She speaks in the dry cracking of earth left too long without rain, in the sudden roar of floodwater reclaiming a path it never truly lost, in the shimmering arcs that follow fire, promising regrowth. She doesn't beg for reverence, she demands responsibility, because to live in her country is to be held accountable, not by law, but by land, not by power, but by presence. And so we arrive at the place where the story coils into itself, as all true stories do, not with a neat ending, but with a return to the land, to the water, to the arc in the sky that stretches beyond comprehension. The Rainbow Serpent does not die, does not sleep in the way we understand. She waits, she watches. She weaves her story into each ripple on the billabong, each breeze that stirs the spinifex, each whisper passed from elder to child beneath the stars. Because she was never just a creature, she is a law, a memory, a presence, and in the outback that matters more than any fossil, any theory, any textbook definition of myth. What she teaches is not simply the history of the earth, it is how to live on it, how to listen to its moods, how to honor its silence, how to understand that everything, sky, sand, storm, story, is connected. And those who forget this do so at their peril. In her story, the land is sacred not because it is untouched, but because it has been touched correctly, with respect, with song, with understanding. The great tragedy of modernity is not that we've lost the serpent's name, but that we've forgotten how to move through her country without leaving scars. Yet hope remains. It always does, if you know where to look. Across the continent, language nests are being rebuilt. Songlines are being resung. Sacred sites are being protected not just by law, but by love. Love for land, for lore, for the serpent who still slithers unseen beneath our feet. Children are learning not just English and maths, but chukurpa and bushcraft, the old names for stars, the dances of the rains. They are learning to listen, and perhaps, just perhaps, that's the future the serpent longs for. Not one where she is worshipped, but one where she is understood, not as myth, but as method. There will always be those who look for a skeleton in the dirt, hoping to find her bones. Let them look, let them measure and date and classify. They may find something, a vertebra here, a tooth there, evidence perhaps that once, long ago, a creature of immense power slid through the reeds and changed everything. But that's only one kind of truth, because the greater truth is still moving, still shimmering, still arcing through the hearts of those who carry her name in their language, in their land, in their dreaming. She is not a relic. She is a rhythm, a confession of the earth itself. And in the quiet, after all the fires have burned, after the rivers have flooded and receded, after the last light of day curves against the dusk in hues of violet and gold, you will see her. Not in the sky, but in the silence. That's when you'll know. The bush speaks. Are you listening?